The coffee hit her suit before I even registered what my hands had done. 1 second I was speed walking through the marble lobby of the Alderton Grand with a tray of 6 espresso drinks balanced against my forearm, repeating a silent prayer that I could deliver them to the private banquet hall before the hostess noticed I was 7 minutes late. The next second I was watching a dark, spreading bloom of espresso soak into the most immaculate white fabric I had ever seen in my life. Everything stopped. I mean that literally. The ambient noise of the lobby, the soft piano, the click of heels on marble, the low murmur of wealthy people discussing whatever wealthy people discuss at 10 in the morning, it all just ceased, like someone had pulled a plug on the world. I looked down at my hands. The tray had tilted. 3 cups were now empty. One was rolling slowly toward the toe of a very expensive heel. I looked up. She was tall. That was the first thing I noticed. Not her face, not the suit, but the sheer vertical presence of her, the way she occupied space like the room had been built around her. She stood completely still in the center of the lobby, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were already reaching for their earpieces, their eyes sweeping the room with the focused efficiency of people trained to respond to threats. She was the threat, I realized. She was always the threat. She just happened to also be the victim. Her suit was white, had been white. It was a double-breasted blazer over wide-leg trousers, the kind of tailored perfection that probably cost more than my rent for 4 months. The coffee had caught her across the left lapel and down the front panel of the jacket. The stain was enormous and brown and spreading, and it seemed to pulse with its own catastrophic energy. I looked at her face. She was looking at me. She had the kind of face that made you understand, immediately and without question, why powerful men were afraid of her. Dark eyes, very still, set beneath perfectly shaped brows that communicated nothing but observation. A sharp jaw. Lips that were neither smiling nor frowning, simply present, resting in a line of absolute control. She wore no visible jewelry, except for a single gold ring on her right hand, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face with the kind of careful precision that suggested every choice she made was deliberate. She was looking at me the way a scientist looks at a specimen. I said, with full awareness of how useless the word was in this moment, "Sorry." One of the guards stepped forward. I flinched so hard I nearly knocked over the remaining cups. She raised one hand, just slightly, barely a movement, and he stopped. She kept looking at me. "Sorry," I said again, "because I am constitutionally incapable of stopping when I'm nervous." I didn't. I mean, my coworker called out, and I'm covering 4 sections, and the elevator was, "This is absolutely my fault, and I am so deeply, genuinely, cosmically sorry, and I will pay for the dry cleaning. I will pay for whatever you need. I can probably, well, honestly, I cannot pay for that suit because it looks like it costs more than my car. But I am very, very, what is your name?" Her voice was low and even. Not loud. She did not need to be loud. She was the kind of person whose voice simply arrived, fully formed, like it expected to be heard. I swallowed. Nora Bellamy. "I work here, event catering staff. I've been here 3 years. This has genuinely never happened before, and I know that's what everyone says. But in my case it is actually. Who do you report to?" "Tonight. Technically, Marco Ferretti. He's the floor manager for the private event upstairs. But he's managing the kitchen right now, and I was covering for Danny. She's a coworker. She had a family emergency. Or she said she did, and I know how that sounds. But she genuinely seemed, you're covering her section. Yes, and yours. Yes. Alone." I blinked. "Yes?" She looked down at her suit, then back at me. The expression on her face did not change, and I could not determine whether I was about to be yelled at, fired, or escorted out by a man who could bench press a refrigerator. My hands were shaking. I could feel it in my wrists. Then she said, "Go deliver the remaining orders. Come back to this lobby in 15 minutes. I stared at her. What? The coffee that did not land on me is still in the cups on that tray. Someone upstairs is waiting for it. Go." I stood very still for another full second. Then something in my body made a decision my brain hadn't finished approving, and I said, "Right. Yes. Coming back in 15, and walked, fast, not quite running, toward the elevator. I pressed the button 6 times. In the elevator, I had approximately 45 seconds to spiral completely. Who was she? Clearly someone important. Clearly someone whose security detail did not like having me within arm's reach. Clearly someone who could have me fired before I reached the 6th floor, if she felt like it. My reflection in the mirrored elevator doors looked back at me with the expression of a woman who understood on some cellular level that she had just made a catastrophic mistake. I delivered the coffee. The hostess didn't even look at me. I floated back downstairs in a fog. She was still in the lobby. She had removed the jacket. She was now standing near the window in a white silk blouse tucked into the trousers. And the stained jacket was folded over the arm of one of the guards, and she looked, absurdly, even more composed than she had before. I walked toward her. My feet felt like someone else's. "Nora Bellamy," she said when I was close enough. "Still me, yes. I was told by the event manager that you've been working this venue for 3 years. He also told me that he was aware Daniela Russo called out tonight and that he assigned you double sections without arranging additional support." I blinked. "You? When did you talk to Marco?" 11 minutes ago. She looked at me with that same scientist expression. "Is that an accurate summary of what happened?" Yes, but it's fine. I mean, it's his event and he had a lot going on. You were going to let him blame you." I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because the honest answer was yes. I probably was, because that is what I do. I absorb blame because it is easier than conflict. And the fact that she had identified this within approximately 4 minutes of meeting me was somehow more terrifying than the suit. "I don't want anyone to lose their job over an accident," I said finally. "Including yourself?" I am a little more worried about mine, yes. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the suggestion that one was theoretically possible. "You're not fired," she said. "The event company has been managing this venue for 6 years under my family's contract. They'll be having a separate conversation with Marco Ferretti." I stared. "Your family's contract. The Alderton Grand belongs to the Romano Group." She said it the way people say the sky is blue, simply, without performance. "I am Alessia Romano." The name landed in my chest like a stone dropped into water. I knew that name. Everyone in this city knew that name, Romano. The family whose charitable donations funded 3 hospital wings and whose private business dealings funded things that nobody asked about too loudly. The family whose matriarch had died 8 years ago and left her eldest daughter in charge of an empire that nobody fully understood the shape of. The family that powerful men mentioned carefully and quietly, as though the words themselves might attract attention. Alessia Romano, the Mafia Queen. That was what people called her when she wasn't listening, and perhaps sometimes when she was. I had spilled coffee on the Mafia Queen's white suit. "I see you've heard of me," she said. Yes, a little. Some. I was doing the thing where my mouth just kept generating words with minimal oversight from my brain. "I mean, you owned this hotel, so I suppose I've been working for you for 3 years, technically, which makes this whole thing even more. I have a proposal for you." I stopped talking. She studied me for a moment. "My current personal assistant resigned last week. The role has specific demands that make it difficult to fill quickly. You handled a high-pressure situation tonight with more grace than most people I employ who are paid considerably more. You protected a colleague you had no obligation to protect. You told the truth when a lie would have been easier." A pause. "I find these qualities useful. You want to hire me," I said. "As your personal assistant, yes, because I spilled coffee on you, because of what I observed after." I looked at her for a long moment. The marble lobby was quiet around us. The guards had moved slightly apart, giving us a bubble of privacy. Outside the tall windows, the city was dark and wet with an early October rain, and the lights of the street blurred through the glass in long golden streaks. "I don't know anything about being a personal assistant to someone like you," I said carefully. "You'll learn. I have 2 jobs. You would have one. I'm very clumsy. You've demonstrated that." "That was a joke," I said. "I think. Was that a joke?" She held my gaze. "The salary is 4 times what you currently make between both positions. There is a car allowance, a clothing stipend, and full benefits." I did the math in my head. Approximately 4 seconds of mental arithmetic, during which time I thought about my unpaid electric bill, the loan I'd taken out when my laptop died in February, and the fact that I'd been eating rice 4 nights a week since September. "When do I start?" I said. "Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below." The first morning I arrived at the Romano Group's offices, I wore the best blazer I owned, which I'd bought 3 years ago for a job interview I didn't get, and I stood in front of the elevator bank in the lobby, feeling like a person who had accidentally wandered into the wrong movie. The building was a 40-story tower of dark glass and steel in the financial district, the kind of architecture that communicates wealth through restraint, no ornamentation, no flourish, just clean, brutal lines pointed at the sky. The lobby had 2 security desks, biometric entry panels, and a receptionist who wore a headset and looked at me with polite professional skepticism. I said my name and was given a visitor lanyard, and escorted to the private elevator that served the executive floors. The executive floors had a different quality of silence than the rest of the building. Not empty quiet, but controlled quiet, like sound itself understood the dress code. I was shown to a glass-walled office suite on the 38th floor, given a desk, a laptop, and a brief orientation by a woman named Catalina, who was Alessia's executive scheduler, and had the energy of someone who had survived many things and would survive many more. "Miss Romano will brief you herself at 9, Catalina said. "She doesn't like late. She doesn't like surprises. She doesn't like being asked to repeat herself. She takes her coffee with nothing in it, served at exact the right temperature, which you will learn by trial. She works until she decides she's finished, which is usually between 10 and midnight. Any questions?" "Just one," I said. "Should I be scared?" Catalina looked at me with something I could only describe as fond pity. "Everyone is scared," she said. "The ones who do well are scared and useful at the same time." This was not the most comforting orientation speech I'd ever received, but it was honest, and I have always preferred honesty to comfort. Alessia arrived at 8:57. She came through the glass doors in another white suit, different cut from the one I'd destroyed, but the same stark color, and the entire room realigned itself around her arrival. Not dramatically, not obviously. People didn't stop working. But there was a subtle shift, a collective unconscious straightening of posture, like a room of plants turning toward light. She looked at me. I stood up from my desk too fast and nearly knocked over my coffee cup. I caught it, small victory. I would take them where I found them. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. I found the coffee machine. I already made your—" I held out the small white cup. "I'm not sure I got the temperature exactly right, but—" She took it, tasted it, said nothing. I waited. "Close," she said, and walked into her office. "Close." I held on to that word for the rest of the morning, like a lifeline. The first week was a crash course in a world I had never belonged to. I managed Alessia's schedule across 6 different business verticals: the hotels, the restaurants, the private club chain, a real estate portfolio, a charitable foundation, and several other holdings that Catalina described as legacy investments, which I understood to be the polite language for things I was not yet cleared to know about. I arranged meetings with lawyers, suppliers, architects, and city officials. I coordinated travel. I handled correspondence. I drafted responses to invitations and inquiries, which Alessia would read, make one small change, and approve with a nod. She noticed everything. If I used 3 words where 2 would do, she would mark it. If I missed a commitment in a chain of emails, she would ask about it, calmly, before I'd even registered the oversight myself. She was not cruel about it. She was precise. There is a difference, and I was learning to feel it. The strange thing was that she was also, in a very contained way, considerate. On the 3rd day, she noticed me rubbing my right wrist between tasks and asked, without looking up from her desk, whether I had a repetitive strain injury. I said it was just tension. The next morning, there was a wrist support brace on my desk with a note that said, "Use it," not a question. not a request, just a quiet intervention. On the 5th day, I worked until 11 trying to untangle a scheduling conflict involving 4 different time zones, and when I finally solved it, I looked up to find a small plate of food on my desk. A few things from the restaurant downstairs, put there without ceremony while I wasn't looking. I hadn't eaten since noon. I had no idea how she knew. I was still absolutely terrified of her. But the terror was beginning to develop texture. My best friend June, who I had told everything on the phone my first night home, had a clear and unambiguous take on the situation. "Nora," she said, from where she was lying upside down on our couch with her feet in the air, "you work for the most dangerous woman in this city. She runs legitimate businesses. And also, by all available accounts, a great deal of illegitimate ones. Nora, the Mafia Queen, she's been very professional. That's what people say right before something terrible happens to them." I looked at my newly replenished electric bill, paid in full because I now had an actual salary, and decided not to share this argument with June. She gave me a wrist brace. June stared at me. "What?" "For my wrist strain." She noticed. That's either the nicest thing I've ever heard or the beginning of a very elaborate manipulation. I thought about the way Alessia had said close about my first coffee attempt. The way she'd said it, like she was leaving a door slightly open. "I think it's just, she's attentive," I said. "You're using the word attentive about a woman who might have people disappeared." "I don't think she does that." "You've known her 1 week." I went to bed thinking about Alessia Romano and told myself this was purely because she was my boss, and I was anxious about my new job. I almost believed it. The first time I saw the other side of her world was on a rainy Thursday in my 3rd week, at a dinner held at a private restaurant called Faro that the Romano family owned in the old quarter of the city. It occupied the basement floor of a historic building, all dark stone and amber light, and the smell of aged wood and excellent wine. It had no signage outside, the menu had no prices. I was there as Alessia's assistant, sitting near the back with a tablet to manage any scheduling or correspondence that came up during the evening. Alessia was at a long table near the front with a group of men in expensive suits who laughed loudly and looked at each other with the careful eyes of people calculating profit margins. Everything seemed fine. Then, about 40 minutes in, the door opened. The man who entered was tall and broad, with dark blonde hair and the kind of conventionally handsome face that would photograph well. He wore a charcoal suit and moved through the room with the easy confidence of someone who felt entitled to whatever space he occupied. He smiled when he saw Alessia, and the smile was warm in the way that a lit match is warm. Technically true, but nothing you'd want to hold. I watched Alessia's expression perform a nearly invisible adjustment. Not fear, not even close to fear, but a slight hardening of the jaw, a shift in her posture that made her seem, if possible, even more contained than usual. He sat down at the table without being invited. "Dante," she said. The word was a full sentence. "Alessia." He said her name like they were old friends, which, I was already beginning to understand, was exactly the kind of thing that should make someone nervous. "You look exceptional, as always." I was watching from my corner with the very specific stillness of someone trying to be invisible, and I happened to be watching when his gaze swept the room and landed on me. It stayed there for a moment. Something passed behind his eyes. Interest, calculation, the beginning of a thought I didn't like. Alessia's gaze followed his, and I watched her notice where he was looking. "I don't believe I invited you tonight," she said, returning her attention to him. "No," he agreed pleasantly, "but your schedule is remarkably transparent, Alessia. You should address that." Later, in the car back, Alessia was quiet for a long time. The rain was loud against the tinted windows, and the city slid past in blurred light. I sat across from her in the back seat and kept my eyes on my tablet, giving her the silence she seemed to need, and tried not to think about the way Dante Valeri had looked at me, like I was information. "Dante Valeri is not a friend," Alessia said. I looked up. "He is a rival with the charm of a friend. If he contacts you, approaches you, or sends anyone to speak to you, you will tell me immediately." "Okay," I said. Then, because I couldn't help it. "Why was he looking at me like that?" Her jaw shifted. "Because he looks for leverage. I'm just an assistant." "You are my assistant," she said, and the particular weight she gave the word my settled over the car like a second rain. I looked back at my tablet. My reflection in the dark screen looked thoughtful in a way I didn't entirely want to examine. The event that changed everything between us, or began to change it, the first real crack, happened in the 5th week, at the annual Meridian Gala, which was a charity event the Romano Foundation co-hosted with 3 other organizations at a venue across town. I had spent 11 days organizing the logistics. The seating arrangements alone had taken 4 hours and 2 complete rebuilds. I was proud of how it came together: the floral centerpieces, the dinner service, the silent auction items, the stage setup for the presentation. When I walked in that evening in a dress I'd borrowed from June that was slightly too long for me, I felt, for the first time, like I actually belonged somewhere in Alessia Romano's world. Alessia arrived late, which was unusual. She moved through the room with her usual gravitational authority, in a new white blazer over a deep navy gown, and when she found me near the event coordinator's station, she said simply, "Good work," which from her was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I was glowing. I was genuinely glowing. Then, an hour later, I stepped out to the side corridor near the service entrance to take a call from the florist about a last-minute issue, and I turned around to find 2 men I didn't recognize standing behind me. They were not hotel staff. Their suits were wrong, too dark and too structured, and they stood with the particular stillness of people trained to be still. One of them said, "Miss Bellamy, Mr. Valeri would like a word." Everything in me went cold and very quiet. "I'm in the middle of something," I said, which was both true and almost impressively inadequate as a response to 2 large men blocking a corridor. "Mr. Valeri has been watching the gala. He admires your work. I'll pass along his regards to my employer," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "If he'd like to discuss the event organization, the public-facing contact for the Romano Foundation is on our website." The nearer man took a small step toward me, and then from behind them came a voice. "I don't believe she invited this conversation." Alessia Romano stepped into the corridor. I have thought about this moment many times since. The way the air in that narrow hallway changed when she arrived. The way both men turned, and the way their collective posture did something involuntary and instinctive. A pulling back. A realignment of priority, like every piece of them understood in the same instant that they had made a profound error. She was not loud. She did not threaten. She simply stood there and looked at them with those still dark eyes and said, "Leave." They left. I stood in the corridor after they were gone, and my hands were shaking, not from fear, because the fear had somehow inverted during their retreat and become something else. And Alessia was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not the scientist expression. Something sharper than that. Something with heat in it. "Are you hurt?" she said. No, they didn't know. "I'm fine, Nora." "I'm fine," I said again, but my voice broke slightly on the second word. She moved closer. Not to touch me. She stopped at a respectable distance, but close enough that I could smell her perfume, something warm and dark and expensive, and see the careful control she was exercising to remain still. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "I was absolutely terrified." "I know." A pause. "You didn't show it." I looked up at her. "Is this what my job is?" "Being bait?" Something crossed her face. Not anger, not offense, something more complicated. "No," she said. "You are not bait. You are not a tool. You are." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I did not hire you so that he could use you. I want you to understand that. But he will. Try to use me, won't he?" She held my gaze. The honesty of her silence was its own answer. "I'm not a possession," I said. It came out with more force than I intended. "I understand that your world has rules and hierarchies and leverage and all of that. But I am a person, and if I'm going to be caught in the middle of something I didn't choose, I need to know why, and I need to have some say in it." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I started mentally composing my resignation letter. Then Alessia said, "You are entirely right." I blinked. "I owe you a fuller picture of what you've stepped into," she said. "Not tonight, but soon. And I owe you the right to walk away from it if you choose." I stood in the corridor of the Meridian Gala with borrowed shoes and borrowed dress and the full weight of a conversation I hadn't been prepared for, and I looked at Alessia Romano. Really looked at her, past the suit and the authority and the mythology, and I saw something I hadn't expected. She was worried about me, not strategically worried, actually worried. I didn't know what to do with that. So I said, "Okay," and we walked back into the gala together, and I spent the rest of the evening feeling like the ground under my feet had shifted slightly and wasn't going to shift back. The fuller picture she'd promised came on a wet Tuesday night, 3 days later. She had her driver take us to the Hilltop restaurant after a late meeting, a different Romano property, this one elegant and quiet, with a view of the whole city spread below in lights. We sat at a corner table, and she ordered wine and said almost nothing for the first 10 minutes, and I sat across from her and practiced not filling the silence with noise, which is genuinely one of the hardest things I do. Then she talked. She told me about the Romano family, not the rumors, not the mythology, but the actual architecture of it. The legitimate side, which was substantial and real, built by her mother from a single hotel over 30 years. The other side, which was older than her mother, inherited through her grandfather, which she had spent 15 years trying to systematically reduce without dismantling the family's pretentious network, or triggering a power vacuum that something worse would fill. She did not romanticize it or apologize for it. She described it with the same clarity she brought to everything, as a problem she was managing with imperfect tools. I listened. I asked careful questions. She answered them. "You wear white," I said at one point. She looked up. "I've been wondering about it. You always wear white." She was quiet for a moment. "My mother wore black. She believed power should look like mourning, serious, untouchable, final." She looked at the city below us. "I decided when I took over that I would wear white. Because nobody is allowed to stain what belongs to me. Because the color refuses to hide anything." A small pause. "And because I wanted to be the opposite of a funeral." I sat with that for a moment. "That's actually quite beautiful. Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." I laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of me, and she looked at me with an expression I was still learning to read, something warm at the edges, something she seemed to be watching herself allow. "Valeri is not just a rival," she said when the quiet settled again. "He wants to restructure the alliances in the city, and he has decided that I am the piece that needs to move. He believes that if he can show I have something I'm unwilling to risk, he can use that to force negotiations. And I'm the something. You're a variable he thinks he's identified." Her voice was very controlled. "I want to be clear that I intend to prevent him from acting on that assessment. But I also recognize that my intention does not obligate you to remain in a situation you didn't consent to." I looked at my wine glass. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked. "The job, I mean." "Is that what you're really asking?" "No," she said immediately. And then with the smallest visible effort, "No, I would prefer you to stay." "Very much." The way she said "very much," carefully, like she was handling something fragile, did something to the air in my chest that I was not prepared to name. We sat on that hilltop for another hour, and the city glittered below us, and I told her about my life. My actual life, the small cramped apartment, the 2 jobs, the event coordinator dreams I'd been shelving for 3 years, the parents who had expected me to be practical, and the part of me that had listened. She asked questions, good ones, the kind that meant she was actually present. When the driver took us back, she sat across from me in the dark car, and the rain was on the windows again. And I thought about how much of the past 5 weeks I had spent watching her from a careful distance, and how strange it was to be this close. "You said the white is because nobody gets to stain what's yours," I said in the dark. "Yes, but I stained your suit," she looked at me. "Yes," she said. "You did." There was a long pause. "And you hired me," I said. "Yes." I turned to look at the rain on the window. "What does that mean?" She said nothing for a while. Long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then quietly, "I'm still deciding." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and smiled at the blurring city, and I told myself very firmly that I was not falling in love with my employer, who happened to be the most dangerous woman in this city, and I did not believe myself even slightly. June's verdict, delivered the following Saturday over takeout noodles on our kitchen floor, was as follows. You're absolutely falling in love with her. I am not. Nora, you just spent 20 minutes describing the way she handed you a pen. It was a notable handoff, you said, and I'm quoting, her fingers are very precise. I looked at my noodles. You work for the Mafia Queen, June said not unkindly, and you are very clearly, irrevocably, absolutely gone for her. She's my boss, I said. That is a logistical detail, not a counter-argument. She's very guarded and complicated. And her life is she kind to you? I stopped. Thought about wrist braces and plates of food, and the way she'd stepped into that corridor at the gala. Yes. Then you need to figure out what you actually want. Because standing in the middle of wanting her and being afraid of what that means isn't going to serve either of you. June pointed at me with a chopstick. Also, do not get murdered. Helpful, thank you. I'm your best friend. Helpful is in the contract. The arranged alliance began as a rumor from Catalina, delivered in the form of a raised eyebrow over the printer. The family's meeting next week. The Ferrante side. You might want to clear 2 full days from the schedule. I cleared the days without asking questions. This was becoming a professional skill. But on the evening of the first meeting, I was reorganizing files in the outer office when the glass doors opened and a woman walked in who made every person in the room recalibrate their posture. She was beautiful in the way that high-end architecture is beautiful. Structured, deliberate, made to impress. Dark hair perfectly set, a charcoal dress. The air of someone who had been told her whole life that she was significant. She saw me. Evaluated me. The evaluation took approximately 3 seconds and communicated, without words, I have already dismissed you as relevant. She was there for Alessia. I found out from Catalina later that her name was Ginevra Ferrante, and that she was the daughter of the head of the Ferrante family, and that Bianca Romano, Alessia's cousin, who I had met twice, and found both times to be pleasantly terrifying, had been engineering conversations between the two families for months. An alliance. Legitimate on paper, in the sense that the Ferrante family also ran legitimate businesses. But underneath it, a negotiation of territory and protection, and the kind of power that doesn't appear on financial statements. Slisha did not tell me about these meetings. She told me to hold her schedule, so I held it, and I watched from the outer office as Ginevra Ferrante left at the end of the evening with a smile that suggested a woman who believed she was winning something. I went home and told myself the sourness in my chest was professional concern about my job stability. This was not convincing. Over the next week, I pulled away. Not dramatically. I was still doing my job, still bringing Alessia her exactly temperature-correct coffee, still managing every detail of her schedule with the kind of precision she'd taught me. But I kept my emotional distance slightly farther back than usual. I was quieter. I answered questions without adding anything extra. I stopped lingering in doorways when our conversations ended. I told myself this was self-preservation. What I didn't know, until Catalina told me, because Catalina, I had discovered, was quietly omniscient, was that Alessia had noticed. She asked me if you were ill, Catalina said, sorting papers. I told her you seemed fine. She asked me if you seemed unhappy. I told her that was not a question I was qualified to answer. What did she say? Nothing. She went back to work. But she was less, Catalina considered, efficient, for the rest of the day. I sat with this information for 24 hours. On the second evening, Alessia stayed late. I knew because I stayed late too, working on a proposal for a new hotel the Romano group was acquiring, and at 10:30 she appeared in the doorway of my office and leaned against the frame in a way that was so unlike her usual controlled posture that I looked up immediately. She was still in her white suit. She almost always was, even late. But the jacket was unbuttoned, and her hair was slightly less perfect than it had been at 9 in the morning. And she looked tired in the way that deeply disciplined people look tired, almost imperceptibly, in the small lines around their eyes. You've been different this week, she said. I put my pen down. I've been professional. You've been far away. I looked at my proposal document. You have meetings with the Ferrante family. Yes. Bianca thinks you should form an alliance with them. Bianca thinks many things. A pause. You have an opinion about this. It's not my place, Nora. Her voice was not sharp. It was almost gentle, which from Alessia was its own kind of pressure. Tell me. I stood up. I don't know why. It felt wrong to have this conversation sitting down. I don't have a right to an opinion about your business arrangements, I said. But I have been. I started again. I find it very difficult to continue not having feelings about this situation. And I think the professional thing to do is to put some distance between those feelings and my job until I can manage them better. She looked at me for a long time. What feelings? Irrelevant ones. To me, they're not. Alessia, do you think I'm considering an alliance with the Ferrante family because I want to? I met her eyes. Are you? No, she said it with a flatness that was itself an answer. I am considering it because Bianca has been managing family politics for 3 years in a direction I have not fully corrected, and the Ferrante discussions have their own momentum now, and she stopped, looked at the window, at the city behind the dark glass. And because it would be simpler, she said quietly, it would be an arrangement, useful, clean, no complications, no feelings, I said. No feelings. I watched her profile against the city lights. Do you want simple? I asked. She turned back to me. And for a moment, just a moment, the controlled mask she wore slipped, and what was underneath it was not cold at all. What was underneath it was exhausted and lonely, and something that looked with startling clarity like longing. I haven't known what I want in so long, she said, that I've stopped being certain I'm still capable of it. I crossed the office. I'm not sure I decided to. I just moved because my body knew something my brain was still arguing about, and when I stopped in front of her, close enough that I could see the details of her face, the tiredness, the carefulness, all the effort she spent daily on being untouchable, I said, "You're allowed to want things, Alessia." Even terrifying things. She looked at me. Down at me. She was taller. I always forgot how tall she was up close. Her eyes moved over my face with that same careful observation she brought to everything, except this time it was not clinical at all. It was something else entirely, something slow and precise and full of things she wasn't saying. You make it very difficult to maintain appropriate distance, she said, and the word, appropriate, carried a weight of irony I felt in my sternum. Good, I said. I don't know which of us moved first. The kiss was. It was nothing like I'd imagined it in all the time I'd spent not imagining it. It was not sudden, it was the opposite of sudden. It was slow and deliberate, the way Alessia did everything, but underneath the deliberateness was something that had been held back for weeks and was now very carefully being allowed forward. Her hand came up to my face, not gripping, just present, her thumb at the line of my jaw, and I put my hand against the lapel of her white jacket and felt her exhale like she was releasing something. We stayed like that for a long moment. Then she rested her forehead against mine. "This is complicated," she said quietly. "I know. My world is. I know what your world is. Nora." "I know," I said again, and I tilted my head up and kissed her softer, just to underscore the point that I was making an informed decision. When we finally separated, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Open, slightly undone. The kind of expression that must have felt, for someone like her, like standing in a room with no walls. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I told her. "We'll figure it out." Whatever fragile, terrifying thing we had building between us in that office was tested approximately 9 days later when Bianca Romano walked into our lives like a controlled detonation. Bianca was Alessia's cousin, 5 years younger, with the sharp intelligence and zero sentimentality of someone who had decided at an early age that competence was a better shield than kindness. She liked me fine in the abstract, I thought, in the way that a chess player likes a particular piece. It has its function. It fills its square. But she had been watching the shift in Alessia, and she was not pleased. She came to the office on a Thursday morning and asked to speak to Alessia privately. I gave them the room and sat at my desk and tried to concentrate on a venue proposal, and I did not need to hear the conversation through the glass to understand its shape. Bianca was calm. Bianca was always calm, but her particular brand of calm had edges. When she came out, she paused at my desk. "You seem like a sensible woman," she said. "I try to be," I said. Sensible women understand that there are certain positions in which warmth becomes a liability. Alessia has held this family together through 3 restructuring crises and a succession war, and the attention of 2 federal investigations that didn't stick because she is exceptional at what she does. She has done this because she does not allow herself to be exposed. She looked at me with eyes that were not unkind, just clear. "You are an exposure. That's Alessia's risk to assess," I said. "Yes," Bianca agreed. "And historically, she has assessed it correctly. I'm simply noting that the historical record is about to be disrupted." She picked up her bag. "I say this without malice. I say it because I love her and I need her to remain intact." She left. I sat at my desk for a while and thought about what it meant to be someone's exposure. Whether that was a warning or a description. Whether they were the same thing. I talked to Alessia about it that evening, and she listened with that careful attention she brought to difficult information, and then she said, with a quietness that covered something harder, "Bianca is not wrong about the risk. Is she wrong about what to do with it?" Alessia looked at me across her desk. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. That honesty was the thing I valued most about her, even when it scared me. She never performed certainty she didn't have. She had 100 ways of being controlled, but lying wasn't one of them. The Dante Valeri situation escalated on a Saturday. I was at the farmer's market near my apartment, a small ritual I'd kept through all the chaos of the past weeks, because some things needed to stay ordinary. When I noticed the same man passing my stall twice. A third time, he paused near the flower stand and looked at his phone, and something about the angle of his body made the back of my neck prickle. I texted Alessia, "Someone following me, I think. Market on Reyes Street. Might be nothing." Her response came in 43 seconds. "Car is coming. Don't leave the main road." I stayed visible. I bought fennel I didn't need. 7 minutes later, a black car pulled up at the curb. And then another. And then 2 of Alessia's security team were walking toward me through the crowd with the calm efficiency of people who did this often. And then Dante Valeri appeared from the flower stand. He was alone, or appeared to be alone, which with someone like him was not the same thing, and he smiled at me with all those polished teeth and said, "Ms. Bellamy, what a coincidence. It really isn't," I said. He laughed. "No, you're right, it isn't." He fell into step beside me as I walked toward the car, unhurried, carrying his charm the way other people carry umbrellas, always ready. "I want you to understand something. I have no desire to hurt you. My interest in you is purely professional. Your professional interest in me involves having me followed, observed. I need Alessia Romano to understand that her current position is untenable, and that negotiating with me is more survivable than resisting me. You are a compelling visual aid for that message." "I'm not a visual aid," I said. "I'm a person." "Yes," he said, with the particular condescension of someone who considers this a minor distinction. "And people, Ms. Bellamy, are always useful to someone." Alessia's security team was 2 feet away. I stopped walking and turned to face him. I want to be clear that I was frightened. The part of me that processes physical danger was broadcasting an extremely clear signal. But there was another part of me, the part that had spent years absorbing blame and making herself small, and it was now, with great clarity, refusing. "Tell Mrs. Romano yourself," I said, in writing, through appropriate channels. "Don't come near me again." I walked to the car. My hands didn't start shaking until the door closed. Alessia was already at the building when I arrived. She met me in the lobby, not the security desk, the lobby, which was not her usual practice, and when she saw me, something moved across her face that was barely contained. She didn't speak. She just looked at me, at my face, assessing me with a thoroughness that had nothing to do with professional inventory and everything to do with relief. "I'm fine," I said. "You're not fine," she said. "You're managing being fine, which is different." We went upstairs. She sat next to me on the leather sofa in her office, closer than she normally would, and I told her everything Valeri had said, and she listened with her hands very still in her lap and her jaw working slightly, and when I finished, she said, "I'm going to end this." "Okay. I should have moved faster." "You didn't know he'd go this far. I should have known." I looked at her profile, at the anger she was holding down, and underneath it, the other thing, the same thing I'd seen in the car after the gala, the same heat with a different texture. "Hey," I said softly. She looked at me. "I'm not made of glass," I said. I was scared, and I stood there anyway, and I made a choice. That's mine. You don't get to take the blame for the things I survive. She was very quiet for a moment. And then, slowly, something in her shoulders changed. Not quite release. She didn't do that, not fully, but a slight letting go, a fraction of the weight redistributed. She reached over and covered my hand with hers. We sat like that for a while. Later, past midnight, she made tea, which surprised me because I'd never seen Alessia Romano make her own tea. And we sat at the small table near the window of her private suite at the top of the building, and she talked about things she almost never talked about. Her mother, the version of the Romano name she'd inherited versus the version she'd wanted to build. The years after her mother died, when she'd had to perform certainty she didn't feel, because the empire needed a leader, and she was all there was. "I learned to make myself cold," she said. "Not cruel, just cold. Distance is discipline. Because if people couldn't find the edge of me, they couldn't find the weakness." "And now?" I asked. She looked at me across the small table. "Now, someone I trust completely knows exactly where the edges are." I felt the weight of that. The enormity of it, from her. I reached across and covered her hand the same way she'd covered mine. We ended up falling asleep on the wide sofa in her office, her on one end, me on the other, a blanket from the closet stretched between us. At some point in the night, I woke briefly to find that we'd migrated toward each other, my feet near her knees, her head tilted in my direction, and the city glowing soft outside the windows. I fell back asleep immediately, which I think tells you something about the specific quality of safety she had become for me. The crisis came at the Romano family's biannual business summit, held at the family's estate on the coast, a sprawling property of pale stone and deep gardens on a cliff above the sea, breathtaking and slightly intimidating, like everything else in this world. It was a 2-day event, a gathering of the extended family and their business interests, and Bianca had orchestrated it with the specific intention of formalizing the Ferrante alliance. The Ferrante family would attend on the second day. There would be a private dinner. The implication, understood by everyone, was that Alessia would make the commitment official. I had come as Alessia's assistant, which was true and also at this point insufficient as a description of what I was. I moved through the event managing logistics, coordinating with Alessia's security team, handling the 1,000 smallest emergencies that a gathering of this scale generates. I was competent and useful, and I was also, in ways I felt but couldn't name, extremely out of place. Bianca found me on the terrace in the late afternoon. She was direct, because she always was. "You're in love with her," she said. I looked at the sea. "That's between Alessia and me." It was. Until it stopped being manageable. She stood beside me at the railing, and her voice, for once, lost its edges slightly. "Nora, I need you to understand what she's carrying. The Ferrante alliance means protection for the whole family, not just Alessia. 43 people whose safety is partially dependent on the strength of these alliances. She knows this, and she gets to decide what she does with it," I said. "That's what love means. That she gets to choose, knowing everything." "Love," Bianca repeated with something that was not quite contempt, more like grief. "She hasn't loved anything since our grandmother died. It terrifies her. And terrified people make catastrophic decisions." I turned to look at her. "Or," I said, "they finally make honest ones." The dinner was that evening, and Ginevra Ferrante arrived with her family in 3 cars, and the long dining room filled with the particular noise of powerful people performing ease. I was not seated at the table. I was stationed near the side room, managing the evening's program. And I watched through the archway as Bianca guided the conversation toward its intended conclusion, and as Ginevra Ferrante looked at Alessia with the satisfied gaze of someone who believed the arrangement was inevitable. And then Dante Valeri walked in. He had not been invited. He was never invited. But he was here, at a private Romano family event, which meant either someone had let him in or he had found another way, and neither option was good. He crossed the room and sat down, and the conversation at the table shifted, And then he did something I had not anticipated. He smiled at me. Not at Alessia, at me, across the room directly with specific deliberateness. And then he said, loudly enough for the whole table, "I hear congratulations are in order, Miss Bellamy. I understand you've been essential to the Romano operation this quarter. It's always interesting when a personal assistant becomes, shall we say, personally significant." The table went very still. Alessia looked at him. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at him. "You came here tonight," she said, "to create a scene at my family's table." "I came to note," he said pleasantly, "that you have a liability you've allowed to become visible, and that your guests might want to factor that into their assessment of the alliance they're considering." Ginevra Ferrante's expression was carefully neutral. Her father's was not. There was a silence in which I felt very clearly that I was the object of discussion and that the expected move, the tactical move, was for Alessia to recalibrate, to distance, to demonstrate that I was simply staff and Valeri's implication was baseless. I walked into the room. I don't know exactly what I intended when I started moving. Something about the silence and the way Valeri was looking at me like a variable he'd successfully deployed. Something about standing outside the archway while my own future was being decided over dinner. I walked to Alessia's end of the table. She looked up at me, and for one moment her expression was purely, vulnerably afraid, not of Valeri, not of the table, but of what I was about to do or not do. I looked at her. "I came to see if you needed anything," I said. It was entirely the wrong line for the drama of the moment. I knew it when it came out of my mouth. Bianca closed her eyes slightly. Valeri's smile flickered. And Alessia Romano, the woman who had not laughed in a room full of people in years, who had not been caught off guard in years, who wore white so that nothing could stain her. Alessia looked at me and laughed. Not loud, not performed. Just a small, real sound, full of recognition and something else, relief, maybe, or the simple joy of someone who had just watched a moment they'd been dreading become something else entirely. Then she stood up. She reached for my hand. In front of her family, the Ferrante family, her cousin, her security team, and Dante Valeri, she took my hand and she looked at the table. "The Ferrante alliance," she said, "is not happening. Bianca, I should have said so directly 3 months ago, and that failure is mine. Ginevra, I apologize for your family's time." She looked at Valeri. "And you," she said simply, "will not be welcome at any Romano event, property, or gathering again." She said it quietly. She didn't need to be loud. Valeri held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood, smiled his empty smile, and left. The 2 men flanking the doorway let him through. The table was very quiet. Bianca looked at me, then at Alessia. Her expression was complicated in ways I didn't have enough context to fully read, but underneath the complication was something that looked, at its edges, like acceptance. "You'd better not make her soft," she said to me. "I'm going to make her happy," I said. "Those are different things." Bianca looked at her cousin. Something passed between them that was old and dense with history. Then Bianca looked away and picked up her wineglass and said nothing more. The night didn't end cleanly. There were conversations to be had, a Ferrante family departure to manage with grace, security protocols to review. Valeri had not come alone, and his men needed to be confirmed off property. There was an hour of professional reality between the moment at the dinner table and the moment when Alessia and I finally stood alone on the terrace above the sea. It was late. The estate was quiet. The water far below reflected the stars in broken, shifting patterns, and the air smelled of salt and the last warmth of the season. Alessia was still holding my hand. "I wasn't sure you'd come in," she said. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "Until I did. You were terrified." Consistently. She looked at me for a long moment, the sea behind her, the house behind me, the whole complicated world of what we'd survived between us. She raised my hand and pressed her lips to my knuckles. Very gently, something I'd never seen her do, a gesture that was completely unlike the controlled elegance she brought to everything, something smaller and more real. "I have spent years," she said quietly, "making sure no one could find the edges of me. Making sure there was no vulnerability accessible. No door in." She looked up. "You walked through the wall. I accidentally spilled coffee on it first," I said. She made that almost sound again, the almost law. Then she pulled me toward her, and I went, and her arms came around me, and mine around her, and we stood like that on the terrace above the sea for a long time, while the stars moved, and the water shifted, and the world continued to be as complicated as it had always been. She told me she loved me in January, not dramatically. We were in her car. It was always the car, I'd noticed, where she allowed things to be said that wouldn't quite come in other places, as though motion gave permission. And it was a cold night. And I'd been talking about a new project I was excited about. An event management studio I was slowly building on the side with Alessia's encouragement, and, without my fully noticing how it happened, with some structural support from her business team. I was talking about a venue I'd found, and I was in the middle of describing the light in the main hall at afternoon, and she said, "I love you," just like that, evenly, like she had been sitting with it for a while and decided it was time. I stopped talking. "I haven't said that to anyone in 11 years, she said. "I want you to know that I'm saying it with full awareness of what it means." I looked at her in the dark of the car. She was looking at me with those still, careful eyes, completely unguarded. "I love you too," I said. "I have for months. I just kept waiting for the right moment, and then I realized you're a person who says things when they're true, not when they're convenient, and I should try that." She reached over and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear, the gesture so simple it hurt. "We still have Valeri to contend with," she said. "I know. Bianca is going to find this very difficult. She's coming around. My world is not going to become uncomplicated. I know that too." I took her hand. "I'm not here for uncomplicated. I'm here for true." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're going to make me very bad at maintaining my reputation," she said. "Your reputation will survive," I told her. "You're still terrifying, less so than I was. You were a little too terrifying. Moderation is good." She shook her head, slowly like someone trying not to smile, and looked out at the passing city. But she was smiling. A real one, quiet at the corners, the kind she saved for moments that were genuinely hers. I watched the city pass and held her hand in the dark and thought, yes, this, exactly this. The Valeri situation resolved itself over the spring, in the methodical way that Alessia resolved most things, not with drama, but with patience and legal precision, and the kind of thorough preparation that left no room for argument. By March, he had a different set of problems to focus on, most of them originating with agencies whose names I didn't ask about and whose methods I understood broadly were not my concern. By April, his name came up less often. By May, it stopped coming up at all. Bianca took longer. But she and I had a conversation in February over coffee at the Romano family's private restaurant. Just the two of us, which had not been my idea, but which I'd accepted, because I didn't avoid hard things anymore, not consistently. And she said things that I hadn't expected, about how much she loved Alessia, and how much of her life had been spent protecting something that might have been suffocating the thing she was protecting. "She hasn't been happy," Bianca said, "not truly, in a long time." "I know," I said. "Is she now?" I thought about January in the car. About the way Alessia said my name lately, with something loose in it, something that hadn't been there before. About mornings in her kitchen and long drives, and the way she'd come to my studio opening in May and stood at the back of the room watching me work the crowd with an expression like someone watching their favorite thing exist in the world. "Yes," I said. Bianca picked up her coffee, said nothing for a moment. Then, "Don't tell her I said so, but I was wrong. About softness. About what it costs." She looked at the surface of her coffee. "I thought it was something you paid with. Gave away. Got weaker for every piece you surrendered." A pause. "I'm less sure of that now." I left that meeting feeling like something had shifted in the structure of the world, some small but real tectonic movement toward better. My studio, Bellamy Events, small name, large ambitions, took up the ground floor of a building in the Arts Quarter, all wide windows and white walls, and the specific energy of a thing that was genuinely mine. I had left the Romano Group's direct employment in March by mutual agreement, because we were both clear-eyed enough to understand that the assistant relationship had been replaced by something else, and that something else needed to stand on its own. I still worked closely with Alessia's businesses. She was my largest client, by far, but as a contractor, on terms I had negotiated myself, and the independence of it was something I hadn't known I needed until I had it. Alessia had 3 white suits delivered to my studio on the day I signed the lease. Not as a gift, exactly. She sent a note with them that said, "For events is where you need to borrow my courage. Return them when you find your own, and then below that, smaller, you already have." I just wanted an excuse. I hung them in my office closet and looked at them sometimes when I needed to feel brave. It was a Tuesday in September, almost a year exactly from the coffee spill, when I arrived at Alessia's private office to finalize the details of a charity gala we were co-organizing. The office still felt like hers, even with me in it as often as I was. The dark furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows with the city below, the single white orchid she kept on the credenza, because she had told me once, it reminded her that things that looked delicate were often very hard to kill. I was carrying 2 coffees. She was behind her desk when I walked in, reading something on her screen with that particular focused stillness she had when something required her full intelligence. And she was wearing a white suit, a new one, pale as morning, with a slightly softer cut than her usual severe line, as though she was allowing herself fractional comfort. I set the coffees down on the desk between us. She reached for hers without looking up. I sat in the chair across from her, opened my folder. We worked through the gala details with the easy efficiency we'd developed over months, her questions sharp and practical, mine detailed and experiential, our shorthand built from hundreds of earlier versions of this exact kind of conversation. We were 20 minutes in when I reached for my coffee, and somehow, in the process of gesturing at a floor plan diagram with my other hand, managed to tip the cup. It caught the edge of her sleeve. Not much, barely a drop, a small crescent of coffee on the white cuff. It was almost nothing. Infinitely smaller than the original disaster. But I looked at it, and then at her, and the expression on her face as she looked at the tiny stain was the most extraordinary thing I'd seen in a year of extraordinary things. She looked at it the way you look at something that has become, over time, dear to you. With recognition and warmth and something close to tenderness. She looked up at me. "I am so sorry," I said. "Are you?" she said. "I am genuinely never going to be a person who doesn't spill things on you. I know. I've accepted this about myself. As have I." She reached across the desk and covered my hand with hers, the same way she'd done that first night after the gala. In the quiet of the corridor when we were only starting to understand what we were to each other. Except now she turned my hand over, and held it properly, and ran her thumb across my palm once, like she was reading something written there. "Come here," she said. I came around the desk. She pushed her chair back slightly, and I sat on the edge of the desk beside her, and she reached up and pulled me down, and she kissed me in the way that she kissed me now. Not like the first time, which had been careful and enormously significant and slightly terrified on both sides, but like something settled. Like a language they'd had long enough to speak without translating. When she pulled back, she looked at the tiny stain on her sleeve, then at me. "You know," she said quietly, "the white was supposed to mean that nothing could get through." "I know," I said. "Untouchable. Unstained, I know." She looked at me with those still, dark eyes that had learned to be unguarded for me, and she said, "I think I was wrong about that." I brushed my fingers along her jaw. "You weren't wrong. You just didn't know yet what the right stain looked like." She pulled me close again. Outside the windows, the city glittered in its usual complicated beauty. Millions of lives moving through their morning, none of them knowing about the woman in the white suit who had built an empire and a fortress and a myth to keep the world at a safe distance, and the clumsy, anxious, fiercely honest woman who had crashed into all 3 with a tray of coffee and stuck around anyway. I had not ruined her, she had not swallowed me. We had, instead, made something that looked like this. 2 women in an office above the city, holding on to each other in the morning light, with a tiny coffee stain on a white sleeve, and neither of us wanting to be anywhere else. I thought about the farmer's market, and the gala corridor, and the hilltop restaurant, and the rainy car, and the terrace above the sea. I thought about June saying, "You're absolutely gone for her," which remained the most accurate statement anyone had made about me in the past year. I thought about the moment I'd walked into that dining room on the coast, and Alessia had laughed, that small real laugh, and reached for my hand. She reached for my hand. "You still owe me a suit," she murmured against my hair. "I'll buy you 10 suits," I said. "You'll spill coffee on all of them." "Almost certainly." She made the sound, the almost law, the real one, the one she'd been making more often lately, the one that was mine, and held me tighter, and I pressed my face into the warmth of her shoulder, and I thought, yes, here, this is the shape of it. This is what it feels like to take up exactly the right amount of space.